Welcome back. I've got Colin Cooper on the line. Colin, how are you today?
Really good, thank you. Been really looking forward to this.
Me too. And it seems like it's been on my calendar for a bit. And I've had a few this week already that are like that. I'm like, finally. It's like I'm tired of looking at your name on the calendar. I want to actually talk to you. So really glad to have you on the show. So why don't you share a little bit about you and then we'll jump in the conversation.
Yeah, absolutely. I'm Colin MB Cooper. I started my first business at the age of 18 back in 1998. So that was when all the big computers, the big monitors, before the internet was kind of cool. And from there, I just continued to operate and start up businesses. I've had many successes, many failures. I've been lucky enough that it's taking me across 38 countries. I've worked in over 100 sectors, everything from government to education, university, right through to startups and some interesting industries. And so along that time, got a lot of battle scars, learned a lot, and I'm hoping to share today so many of the successes, the failures I've learned so much from, and I'm hoping to be able to share those with the audience. Also got a background in human behavior, neuroscience, and I combine that with AI and virtual reality. So quite unique.
Yeah, you're definitely a unicorn for sure when it comes to all of those things. It sounds like you're just perpetually curious and you just want to learn and explore and experience new things.
Absolutely. It actually started, if I could take you way back to when I was 13, I went to my dad's for the weekend, and my dad was an electronics engineer, and I wanted to be just like my dad. And my dad just bought this brand new 486 Olivetti computer. So this was 1993. Dad went to work and left me alone with the computer, came home from work and found the computer in bits on his kitchen table. And I can only imagine what was going through his mind at the time, but he gave me two options. And he said, Son, you can either lose your pocket money for the rest of your life. It was like £1 a week. And at 13, that was a big deal. And I will pay someone to fix it, or you figure out how to fix it. And I don't know whether you remember, but the big manuals, they were big, thick, chunky white manuals with Windows 3 and DOS. And I stayed up all night and fell in love with code, computers, and I rebuilt the computer and it worked better than what it did before. And that kind of kicked my career off. And I've always been interested in tech and where it goes and what drives it and the decisions that drive human behavior as well. So, yeah.
I was actually in a computer store the other day with my brother. I was visiting. I went to where he is, and we went into a computer store to look at a couple things. And I was seeing, the solid state hard drives, and I forget how many terabyte they were, and it was like $250. And it's like I remember paying $250 US dollars for a 250 meg hard drive, and
Yes.
it's just like the quantum leaps that we have seen in technology, not only just from storage, but what they do has been, nothing short of, miracle. We've seen, the evolution of, the first computer. I had a Commodore 64, and then we had the Atari, game console, all those things, and to see what we have now, where we can play games, on our phones or tablets, and do all kinds of different things. And with AI, of course, all of the things that we're starting to see, even in the 5 minutes or so we've been on this call, there's been new innovations that have come out from AI that we don't know about yet because they just came
Yes.
out. So it's a wild experience to go into this. But yeah, I can imagine, your dad walking in and seeing what you did. But kudos to him
I know.
for not, just completely destroying you. And just,
Yeah, thanks, Dad.
yeah, I appreciate, yeah, the world thanks you for that, Dad. Good, thanks. We wouldn't necessarily blame you if you did, but we understand the situation. But again, it's that curiosity and exploring and going, how does this work? And I think that's something that a lot of people, they wonder how it works, but they don't actually take that next step and actually take it apart and figure out, okay, why is this not working, or how does this work? And I think that that is something that my hope anyway will continue to grow and not have humans just rely on what is given to us by an LLM or by a news feed or something like that. Just start using our skills to explore and research ourselves. And not saying don't use technology. I mean, by all means do, but I think I'm fearful in a way that a lot of people will just rely on what information they're given and not actually dig in and actually see for themselves.
Look, I agree with you. In my time and career, I've started my first business, as I said, when I was 18. I started hiring when I was 22. I moved from the UK to Australia. And so you'll pick up probably little bits of Australian and British, all combined together. But I was given a contract and I was doing some work with the government and I couldn't find skill sets within Australia at the time. And I ended up hiring in the States actually. So this was before all of the freelancing websites and it was going old school onto the forums trying to find people. I ended up finding someone that was consulting and working with NASA at the time and he helped me with this project. And then it just started from there. And where I'm going with this is that over that time, I've now personally hired over 1,000 people across the different ventures across the world. And there's skill sets that I've seen, and I started noticing this or paying attention to this in my late 20s. So this was around the GFC, so 2008, 2009. And what I started to see was that a decrease in critical thinking, a decrease in curiosity, a decrease in creativity. And I started to see this gap widening between what business actually needed at the time and to what children or kids were coming out of school or college or university. And it was almost like we were having to unskill them to reskill them. And so we developed emotional intelligence courses, gamification courses that I'd put them through immediately for the first 4 or 5 weeks before they even started doing their normal job, just to reskill them back up to where we needed it. But this gap has increased over the time. I did a TEDx talk actually quite recently on this, where I'm talking about bridging the gap between education and business, and why as humans, when we are born, if you look at any 5 year old, I've got 5 children. My eldest is 23, my youngest is 18 months. And if you look at any 1, 2, 5, even 6 year old, they are curious. They're into everything, whether you want them to or not, right? But as they start to get older, you see this being replaced with compliance. And that curiosity, it's almost educated out of them. And then so when you've got 17, 18-year-olds coming out into the workforce, that curiosity is just gone. Yet what do we look for, as you were saying, in our leaders, in people in businesses? We want people to be creative, critical thinking, have that curiosity, and it's gone. The danger now is that we layer on top of that with LLMs. Where are we heading? It's definitely interesting.
Yeah, I have this, what kind of maybe pessimistic view of things. And I think, okay, let's say, for example, that we have some type of global event and internet access is restricted or limited or just simply not available for periods of time. We've become so dependent on that that we, as a society, many of us wouldn't know, literally would not know how to operate without it. How do
Mm.
how do I how do I get there? I don't have I can't pull up it on Google Maps. I mean, navigational beacon, a compass, look to the
Yeah,
sky.
how many phone numbers do you remember off the top of your head if your phone disappears, right?
3345054. That was my first phone number. I remember that. And 682-6372, which is actually the Zoom link, by the way. I did that on purpose. I could have gone with breakfast leadership, but I'm like, nah, I'll just pick the number. That way, if I have to give it to somebody, I just like, oh yeah, it's this number. I haven't had
It's the
that
Zoom link.
number, and I haven't had that number in 40 years. So, but it's I remember those numbers, and I'm not old enough, but in the States, if anybody that's listening or watching to this may have remembered way back then that usually the first two characters in the three-digit exchange were letters. So it'd be like FE8, for example, which I'm not sure why they did it that way because you're looking at the letter. There's a number right there. I don't know why they
Yeah.
did that. I should probably, I can, that'd be a good question to ask an AI agent. It's like, why did they do that? Because I can't ask my, ancestors because they've all passed, but I'm sure
We'll put
somebody
it in
has
the
a
show notes, right?
yeah,
So,
yeah. Well, I'll put a link in the show notes to what that was and why they did it. Yeah.
yeah.
So, but again, and I've had conversations too with leaders, and they have said some things that were, political. I don't want to say politically correct, but they were being polite as they could, and there were some that were just point blank saying it as they see it, saying, these new hires that we're bringing in. I've heard some really derogatory terms, which I'm not going to repeat, but basically they're saying these people are just unskilled. They have no life skills whatsoever. And we have to train them how to do anything and everything. And I'll give a real example, and I've shared this on the show. I help from time to time at an after school robotics program, which they have Lego robotics and coding and things like that. So a lot of them are little kids that are in there, 5, 6, 7 years old, and they're all laptop computers. Well, we set them down. So okay, here's this. Here you're gonna use Scratch, which is from MIT for block-based coding. So the first thing they do is they go touch the screen. I'm like, not touchscreen, kid. You got here's a touchpad or here's a mouse, and there's these keys. And literally, it's like we plucked them off of some planet somewhere and sat them down in front of this thing, and they're like, eh. It brought me flashbacks to teaching CSRs how to use a mouse when Windows computers first came into the office, and
Yes.
and they were just lost. And I got in so much trouble, but I got the okay from the president. I think I've shared this story before too. Worked for an independent insurance agency in Central Florida many, many years ago. And we just brought in new computers with Windows. Everything else was AS400 based. So Windows
Yeah.
311 for work groups, so I'm really dating myself here. So and most of the CSRs in Florida, a nickname for Florida is Heaven's Waiting Room. There was a lot of senior citizens that were still working. Well,
Yes.
they had not really used a computer before, or not much. So they were really having a difficult time because before typing, that was not a problem. They could all do keyboarding, that wasn't an issue. But it was the mouse and clicking on things and moving around, which was really problematic. So
Mm.
I was having a conversation with somebody. He said, you want to hear how I taught my grandma how to use a computer? What? Solitaire. I said, let them play for solitaire for like a half an hour. Within a week, they'll be pros. So I talked to the president who was at another site. He gave me the okay. So we're going to time it. I will walk around. I will make sure by minute 31 they're back at work. Okay. So got the okay. Well, the VP, which was based on my location, they didn't talk for some reason. He comes strolling in. He sees all these CSRs playing solitaire on their computer screen. I literally, I mean, you think there was like a fog machine. There was so much smoke coming from his head. And I'm like, George, President says okay. What the and it was just like, listen to me. And we get the president on the phone. He says, we're gonna give it like a few days, and then we will and I say I personally will go around and I will remove solitaire from all the computers. I didn't know how to do that with Windows 311, but we did it.
They don't know that.
They didn't know that. Yeah, so got it. All of a sudden, all the CSRs were fine. Their productivity returned and actually got a little bit better. He never admitted it was the right thing, but he was like, All right, that I'm glad that worked out. But yeah, he never really was happy with that. Like I'm paying these people to play solitaire. It's like no,
Oh, I love it.
you're
Yeah.
training them on how to use a computer. You're just happening to use a game to do it.
Gamification. Yeah,
Yeah,
it's
it was
gamification.
I was doing that before that was even a word. So
That's right. I love it. Absolutely amazing. And I gotta love solitaire. It was one of the best things about Windows was solitaire. So
yeah, that and Minesweeper, which I never was any good at, but it worked. But yeah, so again, just I know you do a lot of work in the human dynamics of things, and you noticed, like you said, the curiosity and the critical thinking and all of that. What are some other things you're seeing, especially in this world? VUCA, volatile, uncertain, just
mm.
everything that's going on. What are some things you're seeing some companies still struggle with, but what are some things you're seeing some companies doing really well with?
Yeah, so I think that's a really good question. I think I'll tackle this from two sides of the coin because obviously we're working both in education and also in the corporate sector and government, etc. So if we look in education, I think in education they're struggling at the moment with the speed of how the technology is changing and the wonderful advancements that there is with AI being allowing to have each student as a could essentially have its own personal mentor or teaching aid, if you will. But they're still struggling with trying to stop kids from copying and cheating on assignments. It takes me back to some of the early days with calculators when they were trying to ban calculators in exams, etc. And then on the other side of it, within the corporate sector, we're seeing this AI first policy come through. And I started talking about this a little while back, but we started to see this appear where if AI can do it faster, cheaper, or just more consistently, you start there first. So there's this hiring freeze, if you will. So let's see if AI can do it better. And if it can, then that's where we'll start. I think there's a lot of organizations that are scrambling at the moment going, okay, we know we need to implement AI, but who do we turn to? How do we implement it? And then how do we upskill the humans in the room at the same time of implementing tech? And I think why a lot of people are having problems with this. So I've been working and specializing in AI and VR for about 17 years now. So specifically with machine learning, and then obviously large language models or LLMs have made it cool, if you will. And it's the speed of change. So traditionally, like you and I, we would have witnessed a year goes by, you typically get 12 months worth of technology growth. So it gives the human race essentially time to catch up. What large language models have done, it's essentially put rocket fuel in that. So, I heard a coin the other day that, as every 12 months goes by now, it's kind of like going to bed and it's the year 2000. And then tomorrow you wake up and it's now 2025. And that's the amount of technology growth. And so we've got everything kind of thrown in and mixed in the middle. What I am seeing organizations do really well is taking a step back and then going, okay, well, we know that we can implement this tech, but how do we implement this tech to amplify the human in the room, not necessarily replace? And we know that there's going to be job losses because there's going to be shifts. There's going to be things that can be automated that a human is no longer needed to do that. But then there's also the opportunity for you to reskill. So I think anyone that's listening, that if you've got anything which is a repetitive task, there's a high possibility that your job is going to be replaced at some point in the near future with AI. So one of the things that I'd encourage listeners is upskill. There's so many free courses now to do with Google, OpenAI. Start diving into it, working out how you can upskill your human skills. And so the companies which I'm seeing do this really well are looking at human centered. So they're taking this very much human centered approach. They're looking at how do we look at adaptive leadership? How do we start teaching creativity, curiosity, critical thinking? And then combine that with technologies like AI and XR to amplify what we're doing. Perfect in customer service. I was on a well known courier. I was being expecting a parcel, and this is when it goes wrong. I was on a loop for an hour on AI, on both chat and on the phone, trying to just speak to a human. And there was a particular phrase that you could end up using, which I didn't know at the time, and to speak to a human being. And then it was sorted within a couple of minutes. So that's when AI in customer service can go wrong. But if you can implement it with a human based approach where you can say, okay, 2 tries, or, it's not keeping people on hold, that's when you can really use AI to amplify whatever it is that you're doing. And just one last example. We've seen this in the medical field. So there's huge breakthroughs in using artificial intelligence in looking at CT scans, brain scans, and looking for what are some of the signs for early detection on cancer and other diseases or Alzheimer's. And because it can scan thousands of X-rays and CT scans per minute, or per 10 minutes, we're getting millions of data points that it's now starting to do predictive analysis on new scans that are coming through for early detection. So there's some wonderful, absolutely wonderful things. But by the same token, there's two sides to every coin.
Yeah, and healthcare is definitely one of those arenas that I think AI can really leverage some things, especially like compliance. Yeah, I worked in healthcare, primary care specifically, leading multi-site clinics for several years, and yeah, I had felt horrible for the doctors and the nurses and things like that because with compliance and reporting and everything like that, they spent more time doing the reporting and the charting and all of that than they did with the patient. And I thought that
Mm-hmm.
we're doing this backwards. How do we do this? And I think this is where AI, implemented with the health record system, so it falls under the privacy and as secure as it can be, if there's such a thing as security. That's another conversation for
that's
another
that's
day.
that's another podcast. So
Oh,
it's
yeah, yeah. It's like just put it out there. It's out there anyway. Why worry about
yeah.
it? But I think that is one arena to it. And you'd mentioned your endless loop of calls. It reminded me of something that I learned. I read about years ago because there was a list where you could call. It's like get a human kind of thing, and I don't know if there still it works very much or not. But I find that if you're calling someplace and there's going to be a bit of a queue and you're waiting quite a bit for it, and if English is the main language but they offer a second language option, pick the second option. So if it's the second option is Spanish, or if you're in Canada it tends to be French. So the reason why you do that, even if you can't speak Spanish or French or any other language, is usually the customer services reps that work in those fields have to be able to speak English as well. So it's a shorter queue. So just a little side tip for you, which probably is going to get
Oh.
completely ruined now, and everybody's going to do it. So, or AI is going to take care of it anyway. So,
Yeah.
yeah, yeah, yeah. You'll have to share with the audience. We'll put in the show notes what's the safe word to get out of the AI loop, but they're going to fix that too, much like that school that I had mentioned. The owner has Alexa devices, and I don't have Alexa in this room, so we're okay. But students are students, and she recognized really quick that her cart was getting some really interesting orders because the kids would say, order this or order that, and they'd see the order, and she like starts yelling at one of her kids, what did you do? I didn't order anything. No, it was
It was the kids in the
it
classroom.
was Tyler at the classroom at 5 o'clock decided to recognize, oh wait, I can order something here. So yeah, she changed the name to it. I don't She said, well, I'll tell you what the name is. I don't want to know. I don't want to know. Don't tell me. I'm never going to do anything with it. So don't tell me. I don't need to know it. But again, it's technology is a wonderful thing. You and I both have grown up with it, seeing everything that we've seen and continue to see it. I think in closing, it's a question I have for you, and I kind of know the answer already, but I'm going to ask it anyway. I I sense that for those of us that have seen technology evolve from that 486 computer, for kids, if you don't know what that is, ask AI what the 486 computer means. It used to be 386. I remember the
It did.
286.
Yeah, yeah.
When it got up to 386, just like, oh yeah, we're flying now. Let's go.
Put man on the moon,
It,
386.
pretty much, yeah, exactly. We're going to be able to run everything with this, or not. But you need a bigger hard drive for it. Hence why you go to the computer store. That was a racket, that's for sure. But I think because we have seen all of these changes, maybe all the changes that we're seeing now, even at the rocket fuel speed that we're seeing, I think we are able to adapt to it a little bit easier just because that's all we've seen is innovation and change and things like that. So we're just like, okay, it's happening faster. But I think we're like, all right, this is not my first rodeo, as I like to joke.
Yeah,
This is
yeah.
not. So I'd love to hear your thoughts on that. What's your experience on that? Do you find it with all this innovation that you're like, okay, you know, yes, this is going crazy, but I'm not as bothered by it as some people that are not used to this breakneck speed.
I think you raise an interesting point there, and it's it's funny. One of my first computers was a Commodore 64, so when you put the tape in and you'd play it, get to the end, and it wouldn't load, and you'd have to do it again, and that was frustrating. And again, anyone that's listening to this that doesn't know what a Commodore 16 or Commodore 64 is, go onto the internet and have a look. I do agree with you. I think if you've grown up in that era of Spectrums and Commodores and seeing the Olivetti computers and then the Compaqs and then IBM and we saw Windows and then Windows 95 and then Mac and we saw and the internet had 10,000 search engines and then it got combined down to Google and Yahoo and we've seen the growth in technology. It has been this constant state of change. And one could argue and turn around and say, okay, well, parents and grandparents, they saw a constant state of change. And they did. But as each year has gone by and each generation has come through, that change has been very different. I think I think you and I are similar ages. And so when you look at what we've been through with technology change, 100% we've seen this constant tech change, and I look at my kids and generations that are younger than you and I. The changes that they've seen was human based changes. So if you start to look at how social media started to tweak and change human behavior, and then how AI is, and so they're not so used to understanding how tech works. They're very, very good at figuring it out on how to use the tech. But as you said, if something goes wrong, that critical thinking component of being able to go, oh, okay, let me try and figure this out. Because the early days of tech, we had to. You had no choice. If Windows crashed, you were kind of left on your own because there wasn't really anyone that you could call. So you kind of had to sit there and figure it out, or the same as Apple. And so we were forced to pick up these skills in that curiosity and that critical thinking and being adaptive. Whereas I do believe the generations, like the younger generations now, they don't have that. And or if they do, it's getting less and less. And so they become technology reliant and they're so heavily dependent. So when something goes wrong, they don't know what to do. So then when everything is changing, like Cloudflare went down, and that affected large portions of the internet. There was large services that went down, and that's not the first time, but that's a really good example. All of a sudden, sometimes some of the GPS units wasn't working, large language models wasn't working, some parts of websites wasn't working, and there was this panic attack that you saw setting in. And this isn't the first time this has happened. And so I do believe that we are probably the last generation that has grown up with so much physical tech change. Now we're seeing this human element change. So when something physically goes wrong with something, they don't know what to do.
Yeah. See it all the time. It's going to be really interesting as we evolve and or dissolve, maybe. I don't know. It's going to be an interesting
Wow.
journey. I hope I'm not that grim, but it's just sometimes I see these things and I go, much like a pendulum. Everything's going to swing one way and then it'll kind of swing back to another way and then it'll kind of land. So AI in a way. although it's not the same, I kind of look at it in some aspects as okay, there's some similarities to the dot-com era, but completely different. But there may be some rhyming here. So I'm just, you do what you do. You keep on top of things. You'll learn everything you need to learn to serve and help each other and help ourselves. And when we do that, I think society works no matter what tool we're using, whether it's, a hammer and a nail and we're building a wheel or using an LLM and a custom GPT to hopefully answer some customer service calls so Colin doesn't have to stay on the line for an hour. So
Yeah.
good.
Yeah, I get
So,
grumpy.
yeah,
So,
yeah, you and me both, brother. So, love this conversation. Where can people find out more about you and all this amazing work you're doing?
the simplest is go to my website, colinmbcooper.com. That's going to have links to all of the current projects and the stuff that I'm involved in. And if you want to just reach out, you can hit me up on LinkedIn as well. So if you search Colin MB Cooper on LinkedIn, always open to a coffee chat. So it's been
Awesome.
absolutely wonderful. Thank you, Michael. I've
Well,
absolutely loved it.
yeah, I have as well. Thank you so much for your time today and being on the show. Appreciate it.
My pleasure. Take care.